time someone disrespects you, ignores you, mocks you, and you instantly react, you've already lost. You think you're standing up for your worth, but in reality, you're handing control away. Why does one comment destroy your mood for the entire day? Why does someone's silence echo so loudly in your mind? Because deep down, you're not in charge. Your emotions are, and the world can sense it. They press, and you break. They provoke, and you move exactly how they expect. But here's the uncomfortable truth, it's not them. It's you. It's the part of you that still seeks validation, still fears being judged, still burns when people don't behave the way you imagined they should. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They knew peace isn't found by controlling the world. It's found by releasing the belief that the world owes you anything. If you're exhausted from being shaken by every small thing, maybe it's time to learn how to hold yourself steady. And if this resonates deeper than you expected, and you know you're ready to rebuild from the inside out, consider subscribing because you deserve a mind that doesn't tremble every time the world shakes. It always feels like it begins out there, doesn't it? A certain look, a sharp word, someone being late, cutting you off, talking over you, and suddenly your body tightens. Your mind creates a story, and your chest starts to burn. But what if that fire wasn't caused by them at all? What if the anger rising inside you isn't a reaction to reality, but a reaction to the story you're attached to? The belief that they should have behaved differently, spoken more respectfully, treated you the way you expected. That's where the fire truly starts, not in what they did, but in what you wanted and didn't receive. The pain doesn't come from the world. It comes from the gap between what happened and what you believed should have happened. That gap is where suffering is born. That's the illusion of offense, the belief that other people control your emotional state. And that illusion keeps you reactive, always tense, always vulnerable to the next comment, the next silence, the next broken promise. The Stoics saw through this. They understood it's not the event that disturbs you, it's your judgment of the event. It's the meaning you attach to it without noticing. You're not upset because plans were canceled. You're upset because you believe it means you don't matter. You're not angry because someone raised their voice. You're angry because you believe it means disrespect. But what if you stopped interpreting everything as an attack? What if you separated the event from the meaning? You'd realize how little power those moments truly have. This is the difficult part, because we're taught from childhood that others cause our emotions. He made me angry. She ruined my day. But look closely. No one can make you feel anything unless you allow it. Emotions aren't injected from the outside. They're created internally based on how you process what happens. It's a hard truth because responsibility becomes yours, but it's also freedom. Because if no one can cause your anger, then no one can control you either. That's real power. You become unshaken not because people finally change, but because you no longer depend on their behavior to feel stable. Marcus Aurelius said it clearly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That isn't just a quote. It's a reminder that the real battlefield isn't out there. It's within. Here's the truth: the world doesn't need to change for you to feel at peace. You just need to stop giving the world so much control over how you feel. Watch how it usually plays out. Someone says something rude. Instantly, your mind takes off. How dare they? They don't see my value. I need to respond. But pause for a moment. What actually happened? Words. Sounds coming from someone else's mouth. The insult, the anger, the humiliation. Those were added by your mind. If you didn't carry a belief about what they should say, their words wouldn't land at all. You wouldn't even flinch. It would be like hearing someone shout in a language you don't understand. The noise reaches you, but it doesn't touch you. That's the power of a trained mind. Not emotional numbness, but clarity. The ability to stop confusing noise for danger. To stop turning every discomfort into a personal crisis. You allow life to unfold as it does, and you meet it with awareness instead of reaction. And this isn't about pretending things don't bother you. It's about asking a better question. Why does this bother me? What belief am I holding in this moment that makes me feel insulted or offended? Most of the time you'll realize something uncomfortable. It wasn't really the person who hurt you. It was your expectation of who they were supposed to be. A friend who didn't show up. A partner who didn't understand you. A stranger who didn't show respect. You weren't hurt by reality. You were hurt by the image, the version of them you created in your mind. That's where suffering grows. We're rarely wounded by what is. We're wounded by what we thought would be. So the path forward isn't avoiding people or trying to control every situation. It's learning to observe your expectations. Catch them in real time. Notice how quickly your mind writes a script for how things should go, and how angry it becomes when life refuses to follow it. That's where anger lives. Not in the world, but in resistance to the world. And every time you believe someone else is responsible for your peace, you give it away. You silently tell the world, you decide how I feel. But you don't have to live like that anymore. This shift doesn't happen overnight. You'll still get triggered. You'll still feel the tightness in your chest, the heat rise in your face. Yeah, but if you can pause just briefly and then ask yourself, what story am I telling right now? Something changes. The illusion begins to break. You realize you're not a puppet controlled by emotion. You're the one holding the strings. This isn't about suppressing anger. It's about not being deceived by it. Because anger always says, they did this to me. And wisdom responds, I chose how to respond. You're not weak for feeling hurt, but you stay weak when you let that feeling control your actions. Strength is choosing to look inward, to question the reaction, to sit with the discomfort long enough for it to dissolve. Carl Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Your anger isn't a flaw. It's a signal, a light showing you exactly where you've tied your peace to someone else's behavior. And every time you see that clearly, you reclaim a piece of your mind. This is where emotional strength begins. Not control over others, but mastery over yourself. A piece of your mind. This is where emotional strength truly begins. Not control over others, but mastery over your own responses. The world will keep moving. People will continue to disappoint, surprise, provoke. But you don't have to move with them. You can stay rooted. You can become the kind of person who hears, who sees, who feels, and remains unshaken. Not because you're disconnected, right? But because you're so deeply connected to yourself that nothing external can pull you apart. That isn't denial. That's discipline. And that's where real power lives. You're told that reacting makes you strong, that when someone crosses a line and you snap back, you've won. That raising your voice, walking out, sending the angry message, means you're standing up for yourself. That you're proving something. But if you slow down and look honestly, brutally honestly, you'll notice the truth hiding beneath the noise. Most reactions aren't strength. They're habits. The same emotional loop playing on repeat. Someone presses the button, and you ignite like a fuse. No thought. No pause. Just reaction. And later, when the dust settles, you label it justified. But was it? Or did you once again hand the keys to your mind to someone else and let them drive it straight into chaos? Reaction feels powerful in the moment. That rush in your chest, that surge of adrenaline. It creates the illusion of control. But reaction is the opposite of control. It's being controlled. It's allowing someone else's behaviors to dictate your behavior. It's turning your nervous system into a remote that anyone can press. And the more you do it, the more natural it feels. That's how conditioning works. Your brain learns the cycle. Someone disrespects you, you react. Someone ignores you, you spiral. Someone comments, you take the bait. Each time the pattern cuts a little deeper. You think you're choosing, but you're just repeating. Epictetus warned about this centuries ago when he said, "No person is free who is not master of themselves." If your peace collapses every time you're tested, you're not free. You're owned by your reactions. So what does freedom from reaction actually mean? It doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop obeying. You still notice the anger. You feel the heat rise up your spine. Your jaw tightens. Your hands itch to respond. But you don't move. Not yet. You let the feeling rise, and you meet it with awareness, not action. That's where strength lives. In the space between stimulus and response. Most people never enter that space. They react before they even realize what they're reacting to. But the moment you learn to pause, even briefly, you break the cycle. You reclaim your mind. You remember that just because something provokes you doesn't mean it deserves your energy. Not everything that triggers you is worthy of your attention. Think about the last time you were truly angry. Not mildly annoyed, angry. Maybe someone insulted you, ignored your message, looked at you a certain way. How long did that moment stay alive inside your head? An hour? A day? Longer. And what did it cost you? Your focus. Your clarity. Your sleep. That's the price of reaction. It doesn't just steal your peace in the moment. It follows you. It colors your entire day. Energy that could have been used to build, to connect, to reflect, to rest, was burned on something you probably don't even remember clearly anymore. Instead, that energy was burned on something you probably can't even recall clearly now. Reaction is costly, and most of us are living emotionally bankrupt. There's also a quiet ego hidden inside reaction. A voice that says, if I don't respond, they'll think I'm weak. If I don't defend myself, they'll think they're right. But here's a truth most people struggle to accept. Sometimes letting someone believe they've won is the greatest victory, because you're no longer reacting to prove your worth. You already know it. You stop defending your image. You outgrow the urge to explain yourself. When your sense of self becomes internal, their words lose their grip. They don't penetrate. They bounce off. They dissolve. What remains is silence. Not empty silence, but deliberate, powerful stillness. This isn't emotional suppression. It's freedom from emotional slavery. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Most people believe they're simply emotional, hot-tempered, reactive, as if it's something they were born with. But what if those reactions are just unconscious programs running in the background? And what if they can be unlearned, the same way they were learned? Through awareness, through repetition, through patience. That's where real growth begins. Not when you never get triggered, but when getting triggered no longer makes you lose yourself. That's the shift, from automatic to intentional, from puppet to master, from noise to control. You begin to see something clearly. Reacting doesn't make you strong. It makes you predictable. And predictability is weakness. Anyone who knows your buttons can push them. But when you become unreadable, when your peace isn't available for manipulation, you stop being a target. You stop being entertainment for emotionally unstable people. You become someone who doesn't play the game at all. And without you, the game collapses. This level of mastery takes time. It takes awareness. It takes slipping up, getting pulled in, and catching yourself sooner the next time. But each time you hold the line, each time you pause instead of reacting, you build a new identity. One not ruled by chaos, but anchored in calm. One that doesn't dance to provocation, but moves only by choice. That's what it means to reclaim control, not just over your emotions, but over your life. Because the fewer things that control your reactions, the more energy you have for what truly matters. And that's a life worth building. One pause at a time. It doesn't take much to trigger the internal alarm. A look, a comment, a silence that lingers a second too long, a message left unread, and instantly you feel it. A subtle panic, the sense that you've been diminished, that someone now sees you as less than how you want to be seen. From that insecurity, anger is born. And here's the trap. If your peace depends on your image being perfectly upheld by the opinions of others, you've already surrendered your power. You've made your calm conditional. on things you can never control. The world will always misunderstand, underestimate, and misjudge you. That's not the problem. The problem is believing you must chase every misunderstanding to fix it. That every misrepresentation needs correction. That every careless word about you demands a response. But peace doesn't live in being understood. It lives in remaining steady, even when you are misunderstood. The ego's hunger for validation never ends. No matter how much recognition you receive, there will always be someone who sees you as less. And your ego will urge you to fight that, to argue, explain, perform your worth, until they finally agree. But even if they do, the relief is temporary, because it was never about truth. It was about ego. And ego feeds on conflict. It convinces you that every disagreement is a threat, every challenge to your image a battle to be won. But victories there don't lead to freedom. They lead to exhaustion. The more you defend your identity, the more fragile it becomes. Imagine how different life would feel if you didn't need people to see you a certain way. If you could be underestimated, misread, even disliked, without it disturbing your inner balance. That isn't indifference. That's maturity. That's strength. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish." Most people would never admit it, but the fear of being seen that way runs deep. It's why we argue when our knowledge is questioned, why we interrupt to prove ourselves, why silence feels unbearable when we feel dismissed. But when you release that fear, something remarkable happens. You access a peace that no one can take, because your self-worth is no longer negotiable. This doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. It means choosing your response. There's a difference between boundaries and ego defense. One protects your space, the other protects your story. One is grounded, the other is reactive. Most so-called boundaries are just ego wearing armor. Real strength is walking away, not in anger, but because you no longer need to explain yourself. When you know who you are deeply, misunderstanding becomes background noise, not a personal threat. Think about how much energy you've spent managing your image, replaying conversations, rewriting messages, ruining present moments by rehearsing old ones. The ego says, "Don't let them think that about you." But your higher self whispers, "What they think has nothing to do with your truth." That realization is powerful. It's the moment you stop living as a reaction to how others see you and start living from a calm, centered place that doesn't require permission to exist. Carl Jung believed that what we avoid within ourselves eventually controls us. The ego avoids weakness, foolishness, vulnerability, and buries them in the dark. Fights like a wild animal when it's dragged into the light. But what if, instead of fearing those shadows, you learn to acknowledge them? What if someone thinking you're wrong, small, or foolish didn't spark an inner war but invited curiosity, or silence, or even a quiet smile? That isn't weakness. That's evolution. You begin to feel compassion for those who try to wound you, not because you've surrendered, but because you've outgrown the need to meet them where they are. You no longer match their energy, because you're no longer operating from the same fragile foundation. There's a heavy burden in needing to be understood all the time. A constant pressure to explain, to justify, to perform. But the moment you set that burden down, you discover what real self-respect feels like. It isn't about announcing who you are. It's about knowing who you are and letting your presence speak for you. That knowing, that stillness, is what quiets the noise. Not because the world goes silent, but because you stop giving attention to what doesn't align with truth. And truth doesn't need defending. It needs to be lived, quietly, steadily, without ego. Some people don't speak to connect. They speak to provoke. Their words are weapons, not tools. Their tone is a trap, not a bridge. When they throw those verbal strikes, they're not looking for understanding. They're looking for disorder. What they want is a reaction, not because they value your opinion, but because they feed on your energy. When you bite, you give them exactly what they want. When you fight, you hand them power. But silence, real, composed, intentional silence, is something they never anticipate. It disorients them. It unsettles them. It holds up a mirror they can't avoid, because in that stillness, their noise echoes back at them. And without your reaction to distract them, they're left to face the source of their own unrest. Silence is often misunderstood. People assume it's weakness, that not responding means defeat, that walking away means surrender. But silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. It's presence. It's control. Anyone can shout back. Anyone can slam a door. Anyone can send the long message or fire off the insult. That takes no discipline. But to feel the pull to react and still choose not to, that's mastery. That's power. True power doesn't require an audience. It doesn't need a microphone. It knows what it is and moves only when necessary. Anything beyond that becomes performance. And if your strength depends on proving itself, it isn't strength at all. It's insecurity disguised as noise. At first, this is difficult. When someone crosses a line, the instinct to defend yourself rises fast. The urge to set the record straight, to clap back, to make them feel what they made you feel. But in those moments, you have to ask yourself, what am I really fighting for? Justice or validation? Clarity or control? Most of the time, it isn't about what they did. It's about how they made you feel. And we try to fix that feeling by changing them. But they aren't yours to fix. The moment you chase their attention, their apology, their correction, you place your peace in their hands. That isn't justice. That's dependence. Real peace doesn't come from their silence. It comes from yours. Silence, when chosen consciously, becomes an act of emotional self-respect. It's not about being cold or distant. It's about knowing which battles are beneath you. Not because they don't matter, but because your peace matters more than your pride. Seneca once wrote, "A great mind is a great fortune." That fortune isn't wealth or status. It's stillness, clarity, strength that doesn't announce itself. Stillness is a form of wealth that can't be taken from you. And in a world addicted to noise, the quiet ones stand out. Not because they demand attention, but because they don't need it. You'll notice something unexpected when you begin practicing this kind of calm. People will test you more, not less. They'll say things just to see if you'll react. They'll poke at your silence, not because they're confident, but because your stillness unsettles them. Self-control challenges their instability. It unsettles them, and people hate being uncomfortable. So they'll try to pull you into the same chaos they're drowning in, hoping you'll thrash around too. But if you can remain still, even when your ego begs you to respond, something powerful shifts. You stop matching their energy. You start shaping the atmosphere. You stop being pulled and become the one who anchors. Carl Jung believed that what we resist persists. When we resist being misunderstood, we trap ourselves in the endless need to explain. When we resist the discomfort of silence, we fill it with noise that weakens us. But the moment you accept that not everything requires a response, you reclaim your energy. You stop reacting and start observing. And in that space, you realize how little power others actually have, unless you give it to them. Silence becomes a boundary, a way of saying, "I hear you, but I choose not to participate." That choice is the line between reaction and response, between weakness and wisdom. You won't get this right every time. There will be moments when you slip, when you say too much, when you explain yourself to someone who has no interest in understanding. But each time you return to stillness, you strengthen the new pattern. You teach your mind that peace doesn't need defending. It needs protecting. And sometimes protection looks like a breath instead of a word, a pause instead of a comeback, a closed mouth instead of an open wound. Eventually, silence becomes your default, not because you're disconnected, but because you've learned that loudness rarely changes minds, that arguments often create distance, not clarity, and that those who truly see you don't need explanations. The rest will see whatever their mind is already prepared to believe. Let them. You don't need to carry their confusion. You don't need to meet them where they are just to prove you're above them. The most dignified response is staying grounded while others unravel. Because it's not your job to correct every perspective, only to live from one that gives you peace. And peace is quiet. It doesn't perform. It doesn't fight for attention. It simply exists, like water in a deep well, calm, clear, undisturbed. You can return to it whenever you choose, but no one can poison it, unless you allow them to. When people arrive with their storms and their noise, in his eyes, their chaos, you don't open the door. You don't shout through it. You don't throw anything back. You let it knock and pass. Because silence born from strength is never empty. It's full of everything. They wish they could control in you, but can't. Detachment is often misunderstood as apathy. People think it means shutting your heart down, moving through life numb and untouched. That isn't detachment. That's escape. True detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being ruled by what you feel. It's not a wall. It's a window, clear and steady. You still see. You still feel. You still care. But you no longer drown in it. You create space between the feeling and the reaction. That space is where strength grows. So much suffering comes from being swept away by emotions we never pause to examine. We feel something sharp and react instantly, right, without asking why it's there. But imagine pausing instead, not to suppress, not to deny, but to understand. What is this feeling trying to show me? Is it about this moment or something older I've been carrying for years? That's the gift of detachment. It slows life down just enough for wisdom to speak before emotion takes control. You stop living on edge. You stop being a slave to impulse. Most people think quick reactions signal confidence, but often they reveal fear. Fear of discomfort, fear of silence, fear of sitting with what's unresolved. Growth doesn't happen at that speed. It happens in pause, in restraint, in choice. So the next time life tries to provoke you, remember this. You don't need to react to prove strength. You don't need to explain to prove worth. You don't need to win to be powerful. Real power is staying calm when chaos demands your attention. Real strength is choosing peace when ego wants war. And the more you master that choice, the freer you become. Because the world can only control you when you respond automatically. But when you pause, when you choose, you take your life back. One breath, one moment, one quiet decision at